Tonight I want to talk about straw purchases. Actually, I want to talk about a very specific aspect of straw purchases as they relate to the Form 4473. Now, a lot of us have heard about the Abramski case, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, where a gentleman in West Virginia, I believe he was a police officer, was prosecuted for a straw purchase because he lied on the 4473. Now, this guy did everything possibly wrong. On the 4473, we all know the first question it asks, are you buying this yourself? And if not, you can't buy it because you can't act as an agent for somebody else. It's basically what it says. That's not the correct verbiage, but that's what it's basically saying. And this guy did everything wrong. He had his uncle not only write him a check beforehand to pay for the gun before he went and got it, to use his discount to buy it, he even have his uncle write on the check in the memo that this was for the gun that he was buying him illegally. I mean, they just did everything wrong, because if he would have just bought the gun and then resold it to his uncle for what he paid for it, that'd have been legal. If he'd bought the gun and just gave it to his uncle and said it was a gift, that'd have been legal. But because they did pretty much the Three Stooges version of buying a gun, they got in a lot of trouble. Now, it's going before the Supreme Court, but it's not going before the Supreme Court to say, is what he did wrong according to the law right now? It's going there to say, is the law in itself wrong as it stands now? Should it be the law? Because basically what that question on the Form 4473 does, when it asks you if you are the actual buyer of the gun and says that you can't buy it for somebody else, is it creates a new law in itself. Because none of the gun laws that this 4473 is supposed to be enforcing actually say you can't buy a gun for someone else that can legally own the gun. They go into great depth of who can't own a gun and who can't buy a gun. But nowhere does it say that you, as a legal purchaser, can't give a gun to someone else who can legally own it. And it doesn't say that you can't buy a gun for someone else that can legally own it, and it doesn't deal with how you can transfer that gun to someone who can legally own it. That only exists on the 4473. So the question is the 4473 an overreach? Is it the ATF or the federal government creating laws that weren't there, that aren't passed? Are they being true to the laws that actually exist, or are they creating their own aspects of it? And I have to say, they're overreaching. They're creating their own law because it doesn't say that anywhere. Like I said before, there is no law that says that anywhere other than the Form 4473. That's the only place that makes acting as an agent illegal. Now, one of the things the ATF even says on their website as to why you can't act as an agent for someone, they say it's because it's illegal to buy a gun for someone who can't legally own a gun or obtain a gun legally themselves, which I agree with. All of us can say, okay, that I understand. But they also say you can't act as an agent for someone that is seeking to avoid doing the paperwork associated with buying a gun, or who is seeking to not be associated with a background check or the paperwork involved in buying a gun. And to me, that's completely wrong. That's saying, well, if you don't want to be on our radar, then you're guilty of something. To me, that smacks of, well, if you've got nothing to hide, then we should be able to listen to your phone calls and read your emails and, sift through your crap in the toilet if we want to. I don't like that argument at all. And I don't believe in that kind of reasoning. I don't believe in that mindset. Just because someone doesn't want to be involved in this whole government idea that they have the right to validate you before you buy a gun, that doesn't mean they're guilty of something. If they're guilty of something, that's different. If they can't buy a gun because they can't legally buy it, that's one thing. You don't have to set a new criteria to say, well, they just can't own it if they don't want to go through the process, because then you're making it a law that you have to go through the process, and that's not the law. So I don't think the 4473 should be allowed to stand as it is. Now, if that line was to say, I am buying this gun and I attest that I can legally buy a gun, and I attest that I will not transfer it to someone that cannot legally own a gun, that'd be one thing, but that's not what it says. It creates a whole new rule in itself. It creates a rule where you can't buy a gun for somebody else. If my brother is at work and my gun dealer gets a gun in, and he says, oh man, I really, really wanted that gun and I know it's not going to last the day, could you go pick that up for me? If I can legally buy it and he can legally own it, that should be totally legal. What the government's doing by making that illegal is they are creating circumstances where one legal gun owner can't transfer guns to another legal gun owner. And the law never had that in mind when it was created. The law was never written to prevent the ownership of firearms by people who can legally own them. It was created to prevent ownership by and transfer to people who can't legally own them, not people that can legally own them. So that's why I'm kind of hoping the Supreme Court is going to say, yeah, the 4473 is not in good faith with the law. It can't be allowed to stand the way it is, because I think that's a good first step in getting rid of some of these ridiculous laws, especially ones like this one where the ATF just basically pulled it out of their ass.